Hey Beacon, welcome home to your Bounce Back Blueprint Community podcast, where you are challenged to be, do, and have God's best as you thrive on your journey from setback to success. I'm your Bounce Back guide, Tiffany Huff Struthers, and I'll be guiding you on the journey by sharing tips, tools, and the tea on how I was able to bounce back from escaping death, healing from heartbreak, and finding hope in homelessness. And then I wrote an award-winning book all about it. And shout out to God, ever since I was courageous enough to share my story, my life and the lives of women around the world have been forever changed. And as a member of the Bounce Back Blueprint community, I'm called to teach you to do the same. So grab your journal and let's build this blueprint. Hey, Beacon, hey, what it do, boo? I know, you've been missing me. I've been missing you too. It's been a minute, right? It's all good though. Even Jesus had to take some time to rest, and your girl needed to rest. I needed to rest. It was March 4th, the last time we were together, and I shared an episode about marching forth in power. And it was as if immediately after God gave me that word to share, He revealed to me that marching forth in power for me is going to require me to take some dedicated time to power up so that I can march forth powerfully. And I'm so super excited to be back with you, to be repowered up, to share with you. And guess what? Today is a big day. Let me hit the drum roll real quick. Today, we are celebrating the 1 year podcast anniversary for the Bounce Back Blueprint podcast. Pow, 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 pow. Cue all of those fancy sounds that are indicative of a celebration. So before I dig into today's episode, which is all about some of the lessons that I've learned from this past year of podcasting, I want to first express my gratitude to you for being a listener, for being a consistent listener, for being supportive, for leaving reviews, for sharing, for sending me messages about how what I share and what my guests share have blessed you. I appreciate all of your support. I appreciate you being on this journey with me, and I don't take for granted your presence here, the time that you invest in listening to what I have to share. And it is my intention that the next year and all of the years to come will be as much of a blessing, if not more. Now, all of that said, grab your tea or your coffee or your wine, or hey, if you're like me, your water in a wine glass and your journal, and get comfortable as we are building the blueprint this week based on the lessons that I have learned. These are not necessarily in any particular order, with the exception of the last lesson. I am going to save the biggest lesson for last. All right, so the first lesson that I wanted to share with you is this idea or this truth that I've learned, that I am a value bank, and everything that I share creates an investment from my bank into another, and I am consistently getting returns on those investments. And the reason why this is a huge lesson, you know what, let me say that again, because I feel like you may need to internalize this for yourself and recognize this truth for yourself. And here is the truth. I am a value bank. You are a value bank. So every time I create a podcast episode or create content on Instagram, do a live stream, I'm interviewed somewhere else, or I'm doing a workshop, a retreat, any capacity that I am serving in, I am depositing into the banks of others. And just like when you are making an investment in the market, if you will, or at a bank, when you make a deposit, you are going to get a return, right? Sometimes the investments that you make require a longer period of time before you see a return, right? They are smaller returns that come, and you aren't going to really receive all of it unless you give it time to compound, right? That compounding interest is what gives you the greatest return. And so, from the perspective of the work that I do, not only on this podcast, but with clients, and even making those investments for potential clients, what I recognize is my value is not determined by the immediate return on every investment that I make. Some of these investments are compounding right now. Some of them are seeing immediate returns. Some are small, some are large. But what I know for sure is that God has called me to do this work. He has invested a lot in me so that He can work in and through me. And so when I make a deposit into others, into someone else, into you, I am, creating an opportunity for a return on investment. I am making an investment. I have value, and what I share has value. And the reason why I had to learn this and really internalize this truth and get this lesson deep down in my spirit is that podcasting and being in this entrepreneurial journey, specifically in coaching and personal development, it can be an uphill climb. You don't immediately see the returns on your investments. Sometimes that comes in the form of making a post and not getting a comment or a like. Other times that comes in the form of pouring out in the form of content, in the form of podcast episodes, and not seeing the number of downloads that I would like to see, or not having the number of subscribers that I want to see, or not getting the number of reviews or shares that I would like to see. But it doesn't change the fact that I am a value bank, and what I am sharing still has value. It doesn't change the fact that I have planted seeds, I have made these deposits, and knowing that I am a value bank, knowing that I am consistently making investments, is a reminder for me that my return on said investment, my harvest from the seeds that I am planting, is going to come. And the same is true for you. There may be something that you have been doing for an extended period of time, and you know that God has called you to it, and you know it's your thing, right? There may be seeds you've planted and you've been watering and you've been cultivating the soil, and you're wondering when you're going to get the return on your investment. And I just want you to know that the harvest is coming. Your investment is having a compounding period right now. There will be a return on your investment. Just recognize that what you are doing, what you are contributing, what you are sharing is coming from your bank of value. You have value, and what you have been gifted to share has value. And you need to recognize that not all returns are immediate. Not all returns are going to come tomorrow or next week, but I can promise you that if you are doing what God has called you to do, if you are aligned with the divine, you will reap your harvest. You will see returns, plural, on your investments. So that's lesson number one, right? And the next lesson that I want to share is kind of like a twofer. The first is that inconsistency is the deal breaker. Let me say this again. Inconsistency is the deal breaker. And again, I learned this through this past year of podcasting, because the reality is that you can say that content is king or queen. However, if your content isn't being shared, and well, let me say, if your content isn't being produced and shared consistently, then it doesn't matter if it's the queen or king, right? So you have to show up. And that means you have to show up consistently doing what you're doing, whether you're a podcaster or a mother, a wife, if you're getting up and going to work, or you are serving in your community or in your church, you have to show up. Inconsistency is the deal breaker. If you're feeling stuck, if you're feeling unclear, if you're feeling like you don't know if you're doing it right, these are thoughts that are demonstrative of a procrastinator and lead to inconsistency, right? So you want to be very intentional. And I had to learn to be very intentional about the way I was investing my time, and really recognizing that there is time that is to be invested and there is time to be spent, right? And that piggybacks off what I said before about being a value bank. Banks don't just go out spending frivolously, right? They are making investments. They are doing the research, and they are committing to excellence in studying and being aware of what is best and what is going to bring the greatest return. And it's the same for you. You have to know that consistency is one of the best investments you can make in anything that you are doing. If you are being inconsistent, you will start to have the thought that says, this isn't working, or you will start to think, I'm not doing this right. And the biggest thing you're probably doing wrong is not showing up consistently. So I want you to consider those areas in your life right now where, things don't seem to be working, where you've told yourself, maybe this isn't the right thing. Maybe I should try something different, because you're not seeing the results the way that you expected to see the results. And I want to encourage you, and I want you to get honest with yourself, and I want you to do a self check and really consider how often you've been showing up, how often you've been making deposits. And then I want you to take it a step further and consider the value of the deposits that you're making. Now, I don't want you to feel like you have to do things perfectly, but God does call us to walk in excellence, to move with excellence. And, that is why, you hear people who pray, God, bless the work of my hands, bless the work of our hands. And this actually comes from a scripture in Psalm, which is Psalm 90:17. And it says, may the favor of the Lord our God rest on us. Establish the work of our hands for us. Yes, establish the work of our hands. So if we want God to establish the work of our hands, we need to be doing the work of our hands with excellence, and that means with consistency, right? So I learned very early on, actually, in my podcasting journey, that inconsistency can be a deal breaker. Inconsistency can be the determining factor in whether you make $5 in a month or $5,000 in a month. Inconsistency can determine whether you have 2 downloads or 200 downloads of a particular episode. Inconsistency can determine whether or not people are taking you seriously, right? Whether or not, and actually what I should say is, it's a demonstration of whether or not you are taking yourself and what you have been called to do, what God has placed within you for you to be a blessing to others, whether or not you are taking that seriously. And I know this is something that I usually say at the end of the podcast episode, but I have to tell you this now. God is not going to play you. But if you are out here in these streets thinking you can do what He called you to do less than consistently, you are playing yourself. Sis, inconsistency is a deal breaker. Okay? That is the second lesson. Now, that carries into the third lesson. And the third lesson is all about stewardship. I shared in an earlier podcast episode that God revealed to me last year that I had everything I had been praying for. The reason why it didn't look or feel the way that I expected it to was because I wasn't stewarding it well. And I'll be honest, that was a gut punch, because we all want to hear God say, well done, my good and faithful servant. And so I've learned over this past year that being a good steward is the real flex, right? Because, like I said previously, when you are being a good steward, God is more willing to bless the work of your hands because He can trust you with what you have. And so I really embraced, this message that God gave me and the reality of this truth. And I also shared this, that my word for 2021 is cultivate. And specifically, my theme is to cultivate stronger relationships, because while we are constantly asking for more, 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 when God already says this is enough, this is what you need, and in fact, this is where your overflow is, you just aren't seeing it, and it hasn't overflow the way you expect it to because of how you care for it, then you need to develop stronger relationships with what he's entrusted to you, right? And that is not me saying that you need to be obsessing over anything. What I am saying is that you need to be intentional, or I should say, I recognized that I needed to be more intentional and stewarding what I had well, and ultimately in doing so, being more grateful, right? Because I believe the best way to be a good steward is to live a lifestyle of gratitude. And so, in alignment with that, my scriptures for 2021 with the word cultivate come out of Colossians 3:23 and 24. And ultimately, these are the verses that say, whatever you are doing, do it as if you are serving God, right? Like, so living a life of, if God was right next to me, if God was in Target with you, would you be picking up all of that random stuff when you know He's told you to save money? Or when you recognize that you've been praying to be debt free and you could potentially pay another bill this month, right? And I'm speaking specifically personally from my experience, but I also had to learn as it is related to what God has given me dominion over, right? What He is entrusted to me with this podcast, the lives that are assigned to the words that are to come out of my mouth, and the way that I am sharing them. I also need to steward those well. And so that is why I decided to start doing 2 podcast episodes a week, because I needed to break through that deal breaker of inconsistency. I needed to show God that I was cultivating a stronger relationship, first and foremost with Him, with myself, and then with my gift and those who He has entrusted me to share my gifts with. And it's not always easy, right? And when I say that, I'm what I really am saying is that I didn't always make it easy for myself, right? And it goes back to the other 2 lessons that I've shared. If you're not understanding that you are a value bank and really believing in what God has called and created you to do, if you're not understanding that in order for you to be excuse me, in order for you to maximize the value in your bank, you have to be consistent, right? That all builds up to being a good steward. And so, as you consider whether stewardship has been the real flex for you, look around. Look around at what you have, and this is both tangibly and intangibly. Look around in your mind. What are the thoughts that you are thinking, right? How are you stewarding your thoughts? Because how you steward your thoughts are really what leads to how you steward everything else and the results that are made real as a result of your thoughts. And so I really have been doing the work over the past year, and even more so over the past few months with my new coach, to really begin to steward my thoughts well, to really understand the power of my thoughts and my need to be in alignment with the thoughts that God thinks of me, so that I can be the best version of myself, not only as a podcaster, but as a wife, as a mom, as a child of the Most High God. And so, are you stewarding your thoughts well? Are you being mindful of the thoughts that are lies that are taking up space in your mind and that are interfering with the truth of what God has for you and who He's created you to be? Because if you're not stewarding those thoughts well, then your action is going to be inconsistent, and then you will begin to think that you are not a value bank. You see how all of these lessons work together? That's how good God is, right? He teaches us things real time, and He is always willing to give us an example. And here's the other thing that, or excuse me, here's another scripture that I want you to be aware of. It's Ecclesiastes 7:12, and it says, "A wisdom is a shelter, as money is a shelter. But the advantage of knowledge is this: wisdom preserves those who have it." And so, if you're going to be a good steward, you not only have to steward money well, right? Not only, like, reinforcing what I just said, not only the tangible, but the intangible, your thoughts, right? Your knowledge. What are you doing with what you know? Or, as the people in the internet streets say, If you know better, why are you not doing better? Let me ask you that again. If you know better, why are you not doing better? Take an inventory of your thoughts. Take an inventory on the way you are stewarding what God has entrusted you with. Are you doing everything that you do as if you are serving God? Are you stewarding your wisdom and knowledge the way that you steward money? Are you stewarding wisdom and knowledge the way that you steward your phone, honey? Because we will put a case on it, a screen protector, a wallet to cover it specifically, have insurance on the phone, on the case, put it in the outer box so it doesn't get wet. All of these things. That is how consistently and intentionally we are with stewarding our phones. Are you stewarding your wellness that way? Are you stewarding your wisdom that way? Are you stewarding your relationship with God that way? Are you stewarding the relationship with your family that way? Like, can you say that stewardship is the real flex for you right now? That is the question for that lesson. And then the fourth lesson that I learned is that it is okay for the one thing to be the one thing, right? And you may remember earlier in the year, I did an episode called The Power of One and how I was being very intentional about setting one goal this year. Again, reiterating that my word for the year is cultivate, and I'm focused on cultivating stronger relationships. That is my one goal, right? That is the power of one. Now, that goal is being applied to, or that theme is being applied to different areas of my life at different times during this year. But the ultimate goal is to cultivate stronger relationships. And the reason why that is the ultimate goal is because of everything else that I've shared with you. And so I really was intentional again about cultivating a stronger relationship with you, the beacon who listens to this podcast. And again, that is why I started doing 2 episodes a week. That is why moving forward, you will see some changes coming in the way that the podcast is being shared with you. I think you will enjoy it. And that is also why you didn't see, I should say, me doing much else, right? Because I really want to be able to see how the return on an investment changes so dramatically when you are focused on the one thing. Now, I don't want you to think about this, you know, exactly the way you might think about money, because it's like, oh, but you don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket. I get that, right? But there is always a priority basket. There is always something that is getting the most attention. There is always something that is your main thing. And so I want you to consider, what is that for you? Because what happens for us, especially as women, and as a recovering overachiever, this has been a consistent challenge for me in the past. Is like, well, I'm passionate about this and I'm good at this and I want to accomplish all of these things in this period of time. And there's nothing wrong with being ambitious. There's nothing wrong with being multi passionate. God did not make any mistakes when He created us, right? He knew what He invested in us even before we knew, right? The word says that He formed us, or He knew us before He formed us in our mother's womb, right? Before we even were thought about, He had plans for our lives. So I don't want you to hear me saying that you can't be multi-passionate, but what I will say that what I will say is that in being a good steward, in executing in excellence, and being intentional about being consistent and really building up your value bank, you have to have a focus. And the world has, for as long as I can remember, impressed upon us, the culture has impressed upon us that you have to be doing all of the things, right? You have to be a good multitasker. But really, for many of us, that has created a world, and I may even say a lifestyle of distractions. We are so distracted by everything a lot of times that it is a challenge for us to focus. And so, at least that was my story, has been my story for a very long time. For a while, it was a strength until it wasn't. And so now I'm much more intentional, and I have given myself permission. I have changed my thoughts around the limitations I associated with having a primary focus, because the reality is, and what I know to be true, even um even with it being this past year, what I know to be true is that when I am focused on the one thing, the returns on my investment are greater because I'm able to be more consistent. I'm not feeling like I'm all over the place. My brain is not scattered. I'm not worried about doing 10 things on my list every day. I have a much more narrow focus. It's not that I'm still not working hard. It's not that I still don't have things to do, but there is a flow and not so much force. And so I want to challenge you, if you have struggled with setting one goal, if you have struggled with feeling like if you're not doing all of the things, you're underachieving, I want you to first dig into those thoughts. Like, where did those thoughts come from? Who planted those seeds for those thoughts in your mind? And is it time for you to rip up those seeds from the root? Is it time for you to rethink what you're focusing on and what you're giving, what you're making priority in your life? And I'll make sure to link the episode in the show notes that is all around the power of one, because making the one thing will transform your life. And I talked about this earlier in the year as well. You have the power to change your life. It starts with a decision, right? And once you make that decision, right, once you have that thought, then you can do the work. So I really want you to think about how you've set all of these goals, and maybe you're killing it with one of them and you've been feeling guilty or ashamed or sad because the other ones are not progressing at the same pace. Today is your day to celebrate the one goal and to consider making it the goal. Not that you won't achieve those other ones, but recognizing, giving yourself permission and space to say, in this season, these are not my focus. Maybe in the next quarter, maybe in the next 6 months, maybe next year. But right now, this is the thing. And I can tell you that the thing, when you focus on it, will open doors. When you're consistent with it, when you recognize the value in the bank and what you are investing, it will make a difference as long as you are stewarding it well. And if, in fact, you refuse to make the main thing, it's a clear indication that you are challenged with being a good steward. Okay? That's a word right there. I hope you wrote it down. Okay, last but certainly not least, and these are the top 5 lessons. There were plenty of others, but I will tell you this last lesson. It kind of hits hard. It's a relief, and it's unsettling at the same time. And the reason why is both is because I've constantly been in my own way. And I've constantly been in my own way because I refused to learn the previous 4 lessons. First and foremost, about being a value bank, you know, and not recognizing your value again. And I'm repeating these because I really want you to see the connection of these lessons and how really learning them and embracing them and appreciating who you were when you didn't understand these things and forgiving who you were will lead you to this final lesson, and that is that everything comes full circle, or as it is written in the word in Romans 8:28, all things work together for the good of those who love the Lord. And so I learned this year very directly, I should say, right? None of these lessons are groundbreaking, but I learned them on a much deeper level. I embraced them on a much deeper level this year, and especially this truth that everything comes full circle, and this one really hit home. I really got it right after I did that March 4th episode and took that sabbatical. And it makes me think of this thing my dad used to always say to me, and it was, "You've gone as far as you can go on your own." And when he shared that with me, or when he would say it to me, I would take it with a grain of salt because I would be like, yeah, well, you keep saying that, and now I'm doing this, and now I'm doing this, right? But again, when you don't recognize your value bank and when you aren't willing to prioritize and make the thing, and most most importantly, when you aren't able to, or when you aren't willing to surrender and trust God, you don't really have the clarity to move accordingly. And so, because I lacked clarity at that time, it looked like I was still progressing, but the reality was not so much. And of course, hindsight is 2020. But as it relates to things coming full circle, I got really frustrated in March, and God was saying March 4th, and I shared that with you all. But then I went back to God and I was like, why is it that I am not able to march forth? Why is it that, I have clearly been given these gifts from you and these ideas, and I have these plans, and for some reason, some of these things never come to fruition, have not come to fruition. And I'm trying this and I'm trying that, and I know that these things will bring you glory. And God had to remind me that He never told me to stop being who I was when this journey started. I've shared here on this podcast about how I did Coffee and Clarity for several years, how I in the past was coaching and the Power Morning, all things that I loved. And there came a time not not long before this pandemic began to consume us, where God told me that the season was coming to an end. And what I interpreted that to mean at the time was that it was hard, stop, done, finito, forever. But what he reminded me over this past year, not that it was done forever, but the season of how some of those things were being done had ended. And clearly, I would not have been able to continue to do Coffee and Clarity the way I was doing it because it was an in-person event. But I was so blind, even with the clarity that God was giving me. I was so blinded to the truth of, that first lesson again that I shared about being a value bank, that I was being inconsistent in some of the things that I needed to do as a good steward to ensure that I was clearly hearing what God was saying to me so that I would move forward accordingly. And in that time that I took away from the podcast and really, really, really seeking God and crying out and praying and crying some more and journaling, it has just become very clear that where I started, there was nothing wrong. What I was doing, there was nothing wrong. However, I needed to pause. I needed to step back for God to be able to show me, for me to be able to clearly see, for me to be able to clearly hear Him speaking that there is value in what I have to do, and there is a way for me to expand the impact, right? There is a way for me to increase the deposits and investments that I'm making so that when I receive the return, it will be even more plentiful than I anticipated. All of that to say, number one, do not despise small beginnings. Number two, do not place limitations on what God calls you to, regardless of if there are limitations on the number of people who can fit in a room because of the CDC, regardless of if it is about the amount of money you have to accommodate what He has given you. Do not place limitations on anything that God has given you. Everything comes full circle. And in knowing this to be the truth, the other thing that I had to really understand is that sometimes God gives us vision now, but it's not for now, right? Sometimes God shows us what is to come. And because we get so excited about it, we think that it is for now. But again, if you're not being a good steward of your relationship with God and the truth and the wisdom that He is giving you, then you aren't going to be able to use it properly to be, do, and have all that He has called you to. And so, all of that to say, like I said, there will be a little bit of change being made to the podcast to really increase the value and also to, excuse me, as a way for me to really embrace the value, right? And also for God to consistently get the glory out of what I do. And for me to recognize that the only thing that I will be chasing in these streets, on the internet or otherwise, is God, right? And I just am so very grateful for the past year with all of its challenges and, like I said, ugly cries and misunderstandings and pages of journals with pity parties, if I'm 100% transparent, and telling my therapist and my coach that I'm just like done. I'm tired. I'm checking out. One of my business BFFs, she will tell you I have quit probably 3 times in the last 3 or 4 months, however many months we've been in 2021. But the reality is that I am in this for the long haul. And just like God reminded me about my word for 2021, cultivation, requires a lot of you. And a lot of times when you are cultivating, it is trial and error. You may try and cultivate a patch of soil in one part of your yard and recognize that it is not the same quality as in your backyard as it is in your front yard. And you may have to uproot everything and replant it. You might have to go and buy some soil to add to the soil. You may need some nutrients. And in fact, you might even go through the process of planting those seeds and they break through the ground and they die, and you have to cultivate that soil again. You have to tend that soil again. You have to turn that soil again. You have to get down on your knees day in and day out again. But what I know for sure, and the reason why I saved this lesson for last, is because everything truly does come full circle. I did not expect to get choked up with this, but everything really does work together for the good of those who love God if you are willing to surrender your mess, right? If you are willing to fully entrust God, and if you are, my therapist would love to hear this, if you are willing to embrace the process, the good, the bad, the indifferent that comes with this journey, this bounce back journey, whatever it is that you are bouncing back from, and recognizing that as you grow forward, as you are cultivating or as you are rebuilding, there may be some things that you have to rebuild more than once. There may be some things that you build and you recognize that that wasn't it. And that's okay. That's why it is so important. I guess this is the bonus lesson. That is why it is so important to invest in your rest, right? I made that the first episode of the year about how important it is to rest, to step away from things, to create a space for God to speak to you clearly, to create a space for what is most important in your life. And when you're able and willing to do that, it's transformative. And so this past year has been transformative for me. And I pray that I was able to communicate these lessons that I've learned so that they may begin to be, or they may reignite the transformation that God is doing in and through you in this season, regardless of what happened yesterday or last week, last month, or since the beginning of this year. It can all still work together for your good. Everything can come full circle if you are willing to embrace yourself as a value bank, if you are willing to recognize that inconsistency is a deal breaker and get honest with yourself about how inconsistent you are or have been, if you are willing to accept the truth that being a good steward is the real flex, and of course, you have got to. You have got to make the main thing the main thing. So, yeah, this is the 1 year episode. These are my top 5 lessons. And I am just praying, like I said, that as I continue to share with you, you will continue to share with others, and we will all continue to grow in a way that will bring glory to God. And if you are looking for support in this growth journey and growing forward and, excuse me, making 2021 a transformative year for you, then I would love to be your guide and coach on this journey. I do have openings available right now for breakthrough sessions and new coaching clients. So you can grab the link in the show notes, which is bit.ly/your bounce back guide, and schedule your breakthrough session, and let's get together and make some magic this year. If you haven't already, please, please, please take a moment and leave a review. When you do, it creates the space for other beacons to find this podcast, this community, get connected, get these tips, tools, and the tea so that we all can be the best versions of ourselves that God has created us to be. And of course, I will leave you with this. Doing the most when you know God has called you to do what is most important, I promise you are playing yourself. Be blessed, sis.